Welcome back to whatever this is that we're doing now.
Whatever this thing is.
It's a thing.
Unearthing the redacted.
Unearthing the redacted.
I'm your co-fry, Sarah.
I am your co-fi, Christina.
And I'm your co-fry, Rebecca.
And we have gone rogue. We are on a mission from Sarah and her amazing documentary quest.
I am so pleased that you indulged me and that you enjoyed this, because I was like, they're gonna hate it. They're gonna be like so bored, but I'm so glad that you liked it. Before we get into it,
I exclusively watch sci-fi and documentaries, by the way. Like, that's literally all I watch. So no worries there. I was here for it.
this was an interesting one for me. I switched up my formatting. So as you guys know, my ADHD can be out of control. And I'm like, okay, this is a big beefy and I've got moving pieces in my life. So I actually treated it like an audiobook and kept it running in the background while I was doing other things and would go back and take notes. So I actually consumed this as a visual audiobook is how I taught it to myself to get through it. And it's fantastic. So I didn't sit at my couch. I didn't do that. I was working and doing it, and it was really interesting. So I'm excited to dig into it because it's some really cool stuff here.
It's one that I found on either Netflix or Hulu, and I was intrigued because I'm like, poison. Oh my gosh, like this is super cool and like mysterious. I'm intrigued. And I was blown away. And it's one that I go back to where I'm like, I want to rewatch. Like, this is a good one. I want to rewatch it. It's one that I can always rewatch. And that's kind of where I was thinking. I think it was the time where I was rewatching it and we're deciding, okay, we're going to do some other stuff. To clarify, just for anyone, we're going on strike technically for the technical purpose because Rebecca is a filmmaker and we don't want to fuck up any chances you have of getting in that industry, talking about struck material at this time. So that is technically why we're doing it. Also to align with ethics and morals and whatnot, but just to clear the air. Like, we're not just doing it because like we are whatever. It truly has to do mostly with we want to make sure you can work in that space.
Yeah. And it's appreciated. We really like talking about that random wormhole show that we're not talking about.
That is covered up cryptically by
just slap some stickers on there.
I intentionally put it right here. It's not obvious.
Shh, it's not there. Our lights are out in mourning. Whatever you want to say about those. So
moment of silence.
Yeah.
RIP for now.
Hopefully something happening soon and people that whole thing moving forward. It doesn't look great right now, but
until then
something's gonna give. So
we will continue to produce material for you, which leads us to our episode today. But before that, we do want to say, because we're allowed to say it, Rebecca, would you like to? This is your wheelhouse here.
It's my baby, my pet project. Part 2 of Amanda Tapping, Embracing Mental Health as a Fandom, has a date. It's coming on September 16th.
Yay!
Same time, so it's 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. British. If you need other time zones, find a time zone buddy. But technically our green room sessions sold out in less than 24 hours.
That's insane.
There may or may not be more added. You didn't hear it from me.
Nope, sure didn't.
But there's also still live stream tickets. So if you just come to the live stream, you're going to get an interview of me talking to Amanda about mental health. We're going to have a live Q&A. I will call for some stories and etc. like the first time, and I think we're going to expand on some things from part 1 into part 2. But it's $20 if you're not a companion member. It's free if you are, but if you just want to donate to mental health organizations, the best way you can do is just literally actually buy a live stream ticket, and that's $20 towards mental health.
That's where I will be in the live stream. I don't have money for the other. I will be in the live stream.
I don't either. If I were not working it, I would not be there. So don't worry about that.
If you need help, like last time though, like we're your girls. We get to
Oh yeah,
do
oh
it.
yeah. If you're there, if you're available on that day,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
you're my
I'd be
helpers.
I'd be
Yeah.
helping.
Hell yeah.
We'll check in and say hey again, like we did last time to
Hi.
Amanda. But yeah, it should be really good. It's a really good cause. The charities are NAMI in America, Children's Helpline in Canada, and Mind in the UK is who we're kind of splitting between because the companion has such a global audience that it's kind of hard to pick just one to give money to. So, yeah, September 16th, go to oh wait, do I have this? Yes, I do.
Yay!
www.jointhegreenroom.com where you can get live stream tickets, maybe something else in a little bit, and also some really
Yay.
other cool events. We got some other people like Gary Jones and Paul McGillian, and social events like trivia that's coming up this Saturday that should be really fun, and all
Love
sorts of
trivia.
random things. So, and you're just going to see more and more and more available. So, check it out. Return often for more things. Jewel State's coming soon.
Nice.
So she's going to teach some cooking. It's going to be really cool.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, you can learn a recipe with Jewel State.
Oh, that'd be cool.
We're calling it Eat and Greet.
I never knew how to
I
pronounce
love
her
it.
name. There was too many I's and E's, and I was like, Tatey? What is it? But thank you for saying that. Now
Jewel
I know.
State. Yeah, yeah.
Like the United States, but
Yeah, she's a 1982 baby like me, and it makes me feel like connected to her somehow. I don't know.
nice.
All right, that's it. Come join us on September 16th.
Cool.
Love
So
it.
once again, I'm so glad that you guys indulged me and enjoyed this documentary. And
Oh yeah.
I love documentaries. It's on record. I love a good doc, and especially a historical one. When it's done right, it can be so fascinating and interesting. You know when one is like bad, like it's put you to sleep, like it. You know though, like but this one is so well done, so interesting, and I feel like a lot of people have a complicated relationship or maybe unfairly think about history because of what we learn in school. Because it can be like the American education system does not really do us any favors. And you get like America's greatest hits of like World War One, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, World War Two. And I like these historical docs that kind of dive into stuff that's not talked about in high school or like not very well known. And this was one of those kind of niche topics that it's like, this is so interesting. Why have I never heard of this before?
Well, and I think it's interesting, and we can peel it apart as we go. That's a term I'm learning at work is peel it apart. So we're gonna peel this apart
Like an onion.
like an onion. And I actually am proud I figured out how I could get my notes up here. So now I can see
Nice.
them much better. My brain will be functioning in a much better space. But when I think about your comment about not learning it in school, and I think about like that timing, and I know there's a little bit of obviously a decade in between this, but I don't even think there was full appreciation for forensics in like my high school, like to understand the interweaving in the criminal justice system and like because there wasn't technology to like it still was real gritty and it was revolutionary, but the impact and to like thread the needle of all these stories together, like I don't think it could have been told then as easily. Like it can only be told because we've got that hindsight on it to like look at the big scope. And I think it's a great time for the documentary to come out. It's not like this information was like, I feel like sitting there ready to go and it just like is too late to the game. I think it's a perfect time to be able to look backwards and go like, holy crap, like one person's like obsession and like purpose and another's like really changed everything.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to learn about because also my other note is because in watching Outlander, which just hang with me, there's this obsession with like medicine in it. And like, again, the exploratory of like, it's interesting just to see how deep you go. Cause I'm not a scientist. So it doesn't like, for me, I'm like, this obsession has to go super deep if you want to get to all these answers for all these different things and to not give up. Like this was an incredibly well done documentary. They broke it up. The storytelling was great. It kept it in like chapters of sorts, which of course there's like a book, you know, and it really was well done. So good recommendation. I will trust you for forward documentaries,
Thank
Sarah.
you. So something I thought of when watching this was how, like, Christina, you mentioned in California, you have a lot of signage that gives you warning. Like, you're in a parking garage, and if you stay here too long, like, you can get cancer because of the fumes. And like, we have on a whole become accustomed to labels on food, safety precautions, like ingredient labels, and government regulation in the form of the FDA. Although we can't really put too much trust into them because they kind of suck anyway. But regardless, the Poisoner's Handbook takes
I like your
back.
next comment there. I think you should read that out loud.
Okay, I said, although I would argue we can't really trust them too much. Cue tinfoil hat and X-Files theme song. Because you really can't, like, good intentions, great intentions, but it's comprised of people who are corruptible and influenced by other things. So on the whole, like, I appreciate what they have done, again, with, like, food safety, cosmetic safety, making sure stuff that we're putting on our faces and into our bodies are safe-ish. They're not. I wonder how we will look back on this time and be like, oh my God, this was in food and it was causing cancer. Like, what don't we know now that we will know in the future?
I think it would be interesting to follow the money, because, like, now when I see something that's, like, super big warning to me, I'm like, who paid for that?
Right.
Who paid for that? Because that's who I don't trust. Who
Correct.
paid for that?
It's all about. And there's some corporations in here that some cartoonishly evil corporations that we'll talk about, that it's like awful, terrible assholes. So this documentary takes us back in time before all of those safety precautions existed. There was no FDA. It was the wild fucking West. You could put anything and anything in a bottle and be like, rub this on your face, give it to your baby. Like, it was truly unhinged at that time. And the documentary opens with a statistic, so I thought it was fitting that we also begin with that, because that's how we open up. So in 1922, 101 New Yorkers hanged themselves. 444 died in car accidents, which in 1922, cars were not as popular, so that number does make sense. 20 people were crushed in elevators. There were 237 fatal shootings, 34 stabbings, and 997 New Yorkers died of poisoning. And then they go on to say that in April of 1922, Fremont Jackson and his wife Annie took their place among that statistic. So hella people are dropping dead from being poisoned. That was the number one cause of death that year for people in New York. So that's the framing. That's kind of how weird. Okay, what's going on? Why are people dying so badly from this? And this case with the Jacksons would mark the rise of forensic science and this ushering in of this new era. But before we get into that, we need to meet the stars of our show, because there's two guys, our besties. And I realized while I was writing this, our co-star number one, Charles Norris, Chuck Norris. Charles Norris. So Norris is the chief medical examiner for New York, and he didn't come here to play any fucking games. Traditionally, this was so fascinating. Deaths were handled by city coroners, and anyone could be a coroner. The mayor could pluck someone off the street and be like, hey, random mailman, you're the coroner now.
The coroner is still an elected position. Now,
wild.
They have people that work for the coroner now that go on death scene calls, but the coroner themselves is still like a political position and not I know a lot of things position.
It's like the coroner's office now is the determinant, not the coroner.
But the coroner could be still literally be somebody who...
It could be you, Sarah.
Yeah.
It could be you one day being like, clean this shit up.
Yes. Yeah. So in this time, coroners were real shitbags. Like, they were super corrupt, and they were also idiots. So two problems. The problem is twofold. One, they're corrupt, so they can hold a body hostage and be like, we're not going to let you take your dad home unless you use a funeral home that's like on the take with us, and like we get kickbacks. Or they could sell a cause of death. So it's like, do you want to get away with murder? Just pay us and we'll say, whoops, it was an accident. So
How awful.
It was super corrupt. And then on top of that, they don't know their ass from their elbow. And they don't know anything about the human body. They don't know anything about anatomy. any of the science behind it that we look now as like the Bible when looking at like court proceedings and like forensics and whatnot. So enter Charles Norris. And Norris was this super wealthy guy, and he could have just like had a chill life and been some rich asshole, but he went to medical school. And then he studied in Europe. And then he saw how they were doing things in Europe, and he was like, holy shit, this is so much better. They were incorporating science into their investigation. They were using this medical examiner teaming up with law enforcement to prosecute and start to like go through deaths and crime that way. So he was like, we need this back home. Like, I want to do this. So when he got back to the US, he rallied his troops. He got together because he's really wealthy. He's super connected. He pulled his resources together.
I think that's the only reason why this worked. So I'm going to make that comment and come back to it later. But the only reason this worked was because he was wealthy.
Oh, in multiple ways. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure. So he was like, these coroners suck ass, and I want to change how we do things. So we want to establish a medical examiner's office staffed with doctors and professionals. And in 1918, Norris was elected to the office. So again, he had to be elected. So he had to earn it. It couldn't just be like, I'm doing this now. Like, he had to, again, he rallied his forces together. And the mayor was pissed. The mayor at the time, he was not having it. He wanted someone he could control. And Norris, you would think, okay, he's wealthy, he's rich, like he could be easily corrupted, but he was an idealist. Like, wow, someone in public office who's not a raging dick. This is wonderful and refreshing for once. And he just had this like vision of the future where the medical examiner's office would work with law enforcement, and they would just redefine how death is handled and how criminal cases are prosecuted and convictions and acquittals are made and how they happen. So he is our co-star number 1, but he could not do this alone. He needed help. Meet co-star number 2, Alexander Gettler. These are our 2 main characters.
I gotta go with Gettler being my favorite character.
So spoiler alert, Norris died way earlier than Gettler, and I'm totally bummed out that like he didn't get to see the fruition of everything come to pass. But Gettler was a chemist, and he ran the toxicology lab at the medical examiner's office. Norris was like, you're my man, build this shit however you want. So Gettler built this from the ground up, the first of its kind. And unlike Norris, he came from a very poor background, and he worked a graveyard shift while he put himself through school. He was busting his hump from an early age, and he was obsessed with chemistry. And he thought chemistry is going to change the world. People don't know it yet, and it's going to happen. So he was this real quiet, nerdy, behind-the-scenes kind of guy. He trained his staff in this science as well. He's like, I want my staff to know this stuff too. Like, we're going to teach everyone. And he's also kind of on a mission because he believes that jurors are smart. And if they're presented with science and facts, they can understand this and they can come to the conclusion and decide on someone's innocent or guilt based off of the science. But he has to build this, like his tox lab, he has to build it from the ground up. There's no precedence. So this is something that's never been done before. So those are our 2 main guys. Thoughts?
So like pause before we go to the next.
Yeah.
Because I want to comment on, and I feel like we're all aligned here. So I can only imagine. So pre all of this trying to get stood up, you got a lot of bribery. You got all that money. You got all the organized crime. You got everybody doing everything. So in order to go toe to toe with that, I can only imagine what had to have been done behind the scenes. And like that, I would watch a documentary just on that space about what had to give for them to back off of it or to not keep pushing. Because to give up a free ticket out of there, like to be able to give up, or to like, not a free ticket, but like they were in such a like rinse and repeat of being able to like, yeah, pay off a corner, do this, get away with things. And that's like, I would watch a whole other documentary on like what went down there, because they did allow this to get propped up. It didn't have a lot of talked about in the documentary pushback, but there's a whole other story there. And the only reason is money. He had to have paid off so many people or something. I'd be so curious who all had to get paid.
You know what I think it was though?
What do you
I think it's, and there are parts moving forward down, and also in trials.
Yeah.
Like Norris published a ton of articles, and then all of the cases were like in the news, basically.
That's fair.
So it's putting everything in front of the public so that those people who are used to doing that really can't do the same thing anymore, basically.
But you got to get like the newspapers to publish it. I just find it fascinating.
Anyway. It's like a very, like, Norris was a very public and political position for him to be in. He had to be outspoken. He had to deal with the bullshit politics. Gettler was on the back end. He was like, cool, I'm going to be in my lab. I'm going to build this shit from the ground up. And he did experience failures, but it wasn't as public as what Norris had to deal with. Norris was like dealing with such bullshit, and we'll get into that too. But that's kind of the difference between the two. Like, Norris, very public, a very political kind of field he has to play in, and Gettler is like, I'm gonna go to my lab and do chemistry shit. So
yeah, Norris still digging inside people's bodies, like in the it's like he's just he does a little bit of everything. So
and he is a doctor too. Like I think he's like the first of that kind of, like, before, when it was just the coroners, it's like Jimmy Bob, who was a mailman yesterday, now he's a coroner.
Who do you think killed this person? Blah blah blah. Yeah.
Pay me and I'll tell you. So this leads us to our first poison. So remember Fremont and Annie Jackson, who was like, oh, they died of poisoning. So they were found in a hotel, and this was multiple deaths. So typically, if two people die at once, like, automatically suspicious. They're like, something fuckery is happening here, because two people don't typically die at the same time. Is it suicide? But they couldn't find anything that indicated that it was a suicide, or like a homicide, like a double, like a murder suicide type of thing.
Yeah.
So Gettler is off to work to determine the cause of death, and he starts right off the bat by testing for cyanide. And the way cyanide works is that it basically makes your body so that you can't absorb oxygen. You suffocate chemically, which sounds terrible.
Oh,
but the one lady, our one favorite lady in the doc, like the pack of marbs a day lady, she was like, they dropped like a shot. And I'm like, oh, damn. I mean, if they dropped that quick, then I guess it wasn't that bad.
I see that lady as being maybe 4'10", by the way.
Yeah. She reminds me of what? Oh gosh, Ida. What's the fashion? The short little, like, you know what I'm talking about?
Smokes 2 packs a day.
Yep.
Comes into a homicide scene's like, yeah, I got it from here, guys. Like, I love her.
She was so cool. So there were a couple clues that led Gettler to believe this, because they had this pinkish reddish, their bodies were like pinky reddish color, and their lips were blue. So that kind of indicates they couldn't breathe. Blue lips, can't breathe. Let's test for cyanide. So if the Jacksons ingested it, it would be in their stomach. But when Gettler tested it in their stomach, it wasn't there. So back to the drawing board.
Warning, if you're going to watch this documentary, you may or may not want to eat during this part.
Yeah, I was eating lunch when this was coming up, and I was like, nope. No.
Yeah. Just depending on how you deal with that stuff. But yeah.
I wasn't very bothered. Anyway.
I was eating.
I'm desensitized. I've watched it like lots of times. So sorry.
I mean, but I got through it, and I'm pretty sensitive, but I just had to be like, meh.
Yeah. They get a little graphic on how they describe certain things.
Yeah. I was impressed with the reenactments too.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm like, just be careful if you are squeamish watching things while you're eating. Maybe be careful, because I was impressed.
Yeah,
that's all.
So no cyanide in their stomach. So he's like, okay, maybe they inhaled it. So at the time, cyanide was used as rat poison, which is wild. And they used it in gas form to fumigate and kill the rats. And the police contacted the hotel manager. They're like, hey man, did you like spray for rats? And he's like, no, wasn't me. Like, we totally did not. So the detectives started pounding the pavement, and they're asking around, and they finally get the scoop from a maid, and the hotel did have exterminators come out and spray for rats. So the police did some experiments with smoke bombs in the hotel, and they could see the smoke coming into the Fremont's apartment, hotel room, whatever. They could see it come up through the floorboard. So they're like, okay, it could have happened. Like, this is how it probably happened. But now they have to prove it and test their lung tissue. but the Jacksons were already buried. And this was a time when exhuming bodies was not smiled upon. It was very much frowned upon. They were like, this is spooky shit, you fucking weirdo. Like, stop digging bodies up. So, but it happened. They did it. And Gettler tested the lungs, and it was positive for cyanide. So the hotel manager was a fucking liar, and the fumigator was negligent, and he was just like spraying the cyanide shit everywhere, which is wild to me again. So they were both charged with first-degree manslaughter. But now came the true test. Would this hold up in court? No, it would not. The case fell apart.
Sad face.
Yeah.
But this case had to happen for everything after to happen.
It did.
Correct. So the defense was able to argue that cyanide in their bodies could be a result of decomp. And Gettler had to kind of concede to that. He's like, yes, it can produce like the infinitesimal amount is the word he used, like very tiny. But because this was such a new field, like people didn't buy it. And they're like, this guy is like probably one of those shitty ass coroners that's like corrupt and stuff. We don't trust him. So the case fell apart and both men got off. So Gettler was pissed, obviously. They made him look like an idiot and they undermined his and Norris's vision because he's like, damn, now they're making my buddy Norris look bad too, and he trusted me and I feel bad.
Do you see him go back, like in the reenactment, he goes back to his chair in court and like Norris is like pats him on the shoulder, like, it's okay, man. It's okay. Like,
yeah. So he's like, fine, I'm going to go perfect this shit. And he does. And he does so much work on cyanide alone. He does so many experiments, writes so many papers that to this day, it is still referenced. It still holds up. So even when Gettler loses in court, it's still a win for him because he's like, I'm still learning stuff. I'm still finding stuff out. Norris, unfortunately, when he faced public losses, like it fucking sucked because he had to deal with like all of these politicians and all of this public BS. So, but even when Gettler loses, he still kind of wins.
He had to lose.
Yeah.
He had to lose because then he's like, okay, now I understand the system that I'm up against.
Yep.
And I will never make that fucking mistake again.
Yeah. And honestly, like it was a kind of a good way to lose because it was such a specific thing around like he didn't know, he couldn't quantify the answer. Like their defense back to him was exactly how it should be. Because otherwise if the jurors, if cyanide wasn't the like response back, right? If it was some argument they did, like I don't know that it would have ignited him as much to be like, oh, I need to know my shit deep and dirty on this. Like
yeah. And it is the prosecution has the burden of proof. It's on them to prove it. And if like, so he went back and he was like, I'm going to get this so right that next time, like he has an answer for it. And he did find out that like, yes, decomposition can produce a very small quantity, but not near the amount that I found in their bodies. So first case was a loss. Even though they learned a lot, it was technically a loss. Boo. So this isn't really about our next poison, but it's very crucial information. So the 1920s is when the bulk of our documentary takes place. And chemistry, it was just revolutionary for chemistry in general because of how products were being manufactured. They were creating artificial materials like plastic and nylon from scratch, which had never been done before. People had to rely on like natural products like cotton or whatever. But now they're creating things like polyester and plastic. And then the 1920s kind of saw the culmination of the Industrial Revolution. So the steel industry, automobile industry, oil refineries. So all of these industries used chemical processes in a way that we had never seen. And then crops, our food industry, crops are being treated with chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers. Water is being treated chemically to keep it cleaner. So infant mortality.
It's amazing anyone lived. It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Like infant mortality went down. So babies weren't dying as much as they used to. And then it also expanded people's lifespan by like 10 years, which is huge. Like that's how we've gotten to the point where we're at now. Where like in the 1920s, what was the average lifespan? I don't know. I didn't look it up, but it's probably like 50 or 60. Terrible. You die of like an infection. Are you looking it up, Rebecca?
She's like,
I did look up other things, but this was not one of them. So continue. So all of this chemical revolution was happening. However, the same chemical revolution was happening in warfare. And World War One was so chemically destructive that the great powers were like, absolutely the fuck not. We are not doing this again. And they banned chemical warfare. However, they
As
did
they
not
should.
stop. They didn't stop nations from continuing to develop and stockpile such weapons, which we kind of see in World War II, the sequel, which is very fucking terrible of what
It's
happened.
interesting that 1911 to 1921 is straight up 10 years difference in life
That's crazy.
expectancy. Wait, let's yeah, on men and women. But then the very next year, 1922, it goes down. It goes down for a little bit, and I'm assuming it's war and all sorts of things that caused that, and the Great Depression eventually too. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's straight 10 years between 11 and 21.
That's wild. Yeah. So chemicals were being banned in warfare, which is great. But on the home front, it's the Wild West. And things we would see today as extremely toxic and dangerous chemicals were in run of the mill products like medications and cosmetics. And they did not require testing or labels or any type of safety whatsoever at all. Rub some arsenic on your face. It's good for you.
Well, wasn't there like a cocaine hair powder? Like, oh
They put
God.
cocaine in a lot of things. Yeah.
Oh, and everything.
People were high as fuck back then.
Oh God, yeah.
Just put some radium on your skin. You'll be great.
That
Well,
was
yeah, we'll get to
one of
that
the
one.
most horrific.
Oh, that
So-
one's, yeah.
Cut to Newark, New Jersey, 1923. Fanny Creighton and her husband moved in with his parents, but when they passed away, her brother Charles moved in with them. Charles had gotten sick, and
Fanny invited him, by the way. That's very important.
yeah, I
She
think it was
invited
like, come live with me, bro. Like
Mhm.
the in-laws croaked, and I'm all by myself in this house. Like, come on, man.
Mhm.
So he got sick. It seemed like no big deal. But then he got progressively worse with vomiting and seizures. Fanny called the doctor, but it was too late. He died. Now, it could have gone completely unnoticed by the police, but they got an anonymous letter saying, you need to check out this bitch Fanny because there's some shady shit going on. And this happened not once, but we'll find out twice. Some anonymous person is snitching her the fuck out, which is crazy.
It's the nosy next door neighbor. That's
Oh,
like,
100%.
Nosy
I don't
neighbors
like what she's doing with the yard. So
So the police start digging, and even Charles's doctor was like, yeah, his death was really fucking weird. So once again, they exhumed the body to find that he was loaded with arsenic. Fanny and her husband were arrested. So it was discovered that she took out a life insurance policy for her bro.
How can you do that?
She was evil. We'll get to it.
people do that a
She was
lot.
terrible. It was for
Which is like-
$1,000.
Do
Wait,
you
you can
like,
take out life insurance policies on people that aren't like your what?
Yeah,
Like I could take a life insurance policy out on you.
maybe.
you might have to be family, but
It was
Weird.
her bro. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was $1,000, which I did look up. It's the equivalent of like $18,000 in today's money, and back then that's a lot of money. So the police had also found a bottle of Fowler's solution, and I did look this up. It did not say it, but I'm like, what is this? I want to know. It was a cosmetic tonic that had a main ingredient of arsenic, and it was used to treat leukemia, skin conditions like psoriasis, dermatitis, and eczema, stomatitis, gingivitis in infants, and then Vincent's angina.
I'm not gonna lie, when I saw that in the note, I like squished the Vincent's angina together and I was like, what? I was like, they did what to the vagina? What?
I mean, they were giving it to babies.
Well, that's what like my like glimpsing over. That's why I had to bold the arsenic above it because
Yeah.
the way it's looking, because it literally looked very inappropriate the way it laid out. I was like, oh, Vincent's angina. Okay.
I understand.
This is why this
So-
is important for me to have it up here.
So, like, I had eczema. I could not imagine rubbing arsenic on that shit. Insane. I could not imagine.
you know.
No big deal back then. So Fanny was up for the death penalty, which was again crazy back in the day that they would, like, women are not really convicted of crimes like this. So the fact that they were like, this bitch is bad, she's gonna get the chair. So their neighbors came forward, those nosy neighbors, and they were like, yeah, the in-laws died too. Oh wait, hold on, I skipped a part. Her defense for her brother's death was that he was sad over an old girlfriend and became depressed, and he committed suicide. And the jury bought it, and she was found not guilty. So conviction number 1, not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But the prosecutor was like, this, she's up to something. I fucking know it. So their neighbors came forward and were like, yeah, the in-laws died too. And that was really fucking weird. So they exhumed those bodies and they found arsenic 4 times the lethal dose in the mother-in-law. So just as Fanny was acquitted of the first charge, she was arrested again for the murder of the mother-in-law. So Fanny's lawyers reached out to Gettler and wanted him to look and see what he could find. Gettler did the same test the prosecution did and got the same results. But he learned that the mother-in-law was taking bismuth as part of a medication, and bismuth could be mistaken for arsenic. So Gettler took the stand, testified the test gave inaccurate results, and for the second time, Fanny was found not guilty. But I totally think she fucking did it. So, and honestly, like, regardless of what happened, he determined the test is inconclusive because I believe, I don't know for sure the details of it, but it's like, this is the only test for arsenic we have at the time. And it's inconclusive because it's getting mixed up with the bismuth. So I cannot say for sure.
He actually, in that thing, he said it's like undeniable that it was not arsenic because arsenic vaporizes at a lower temperature than bismuth does. And bismuth would not have, he's like he's putting it over the fire and like it's, turning into steam basically in the tube. So it was determined that bismuth, if it were arsenic, it would vaporize. If it's bismuth, it wouldn't. And the little like metal plate that they had or whatever didn't. So he's like, no, it's not arsenic. It's 100% not arsenic.
Okay. I didn't put too much of the chemistry in the notes because you can get lost in the sauce real easily. But
but I think it actually makes it even more complicated.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know, like, what if she did something else to that lady? Maybe it wasn't arsenic and they didn't bother to test for anything else,
Right.
So I think it makes it actually more complicated for sure.
Yeah. So I totally think at this, I'm watching the documentary. I'm like, she totally killed her brother and she probably killed the in-laws too, but oh well, we can't prove it. So Gettler was excited because he's like, finally people are listening to me. Science is prevailing. But this is not the last time he would see Fanny Creighton.
Well, is this the time in the documentary where they're giving commentary that, like, once he's on the stand, it's irrefutable? Like, what he says is what they go
at
with.
The
like,
end.
Is that at the end?
It's not yet. It's not yet. This is the one that kind of gives him redemption from the first one where he fails, but like it becomes like through time, it becomes so like irrefutable when he's testifying basically.
Yeah. So we're going to segue into our next poison. And we're going to introduce Gettler again. He was a stickler for the rules. He was like, science, law enforcement, yes. But the dedication did not extend to prohibition. So we're in the 1920s. Prohibition has begun. And for those of you who don't know, if you're not from America, prohibition was the outlaw of alcohol throughout the entire U.S.
1920 to 1933.
Yeah.
That's a long ass time.
Yeah. So it was outlawed completely. It was not like a state by state thing. It was the whole country under the 18th Amendment. So he lived.
But we all know these days, like, what happens when the government outlaws something that makes people feel good, right?
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. It never works. Never. No. So anyway, continue.
So Gettler lived with his in-laws, which there was this whole kind of backstory about like how his in-laws I think Gettler was Jewish and he married an Irish Catholic girl, and he like converted to like he went to church with them. Like he did a lot to like prove that he was like a good husband and a good man, and they eventually accepted him. They lived together, and the in-laws ran an illegal brewery in their building. And with the onset of prohibition brought on the onset of yet another deadly poison, which is methanol. So prohibition had good intentions. People were like, they're gonna find other ways. They're gonna go to the theater or these nasty fucking milk bars from the Salvation Army.
Buttermilk bars.
That sounds gross.
Milk is nasty to begin with. I cannot. I'm gonna go get a cold one, and it's a glass of milk. No, thank you.
Gross. It curdles in my stomach to think about it. No.
And Gettler and Norris, like first of all, as soon as prohibition was instated, people were breaking the law. They were like, we're still doing this. We're just gonna make our own. Like it was a huge underground illegal operation. And both Gettler and Norris were against this. They were like, this is not going to work, and people are going to seek alternatives, and they are going to get sick and die. So rich people could afford better alcohol, but the poors, not so much. It's always poor people getting the shit end of the stick. So they ended up, so you had your own distilleries, like people would distill their own thing. And if you were poor, you would distill things like sawdust or furniture.
Chop up your chair.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you get when you distill wood? Methanol. And when methanol is ingested, it turns into formaldehyde and then formic acid. It causes blindness, seizures, and a coma. And this whole process could take 5 days to kill someone.
And you know, when I was growing up, they told me, like, don't drink that illegal moonshine because it'll make you go blind.
Mm-hmm.
This is totally where that I had no idea
There's
where that
truth to it,
actually
yeah.
came from, but it was specifically if people had distilled wood, basically. That's why it'll make you go blind. It's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't either.
So they couldn't, obviously Gettler and Norris couldn't really do much because like all they can do is campaign to get it repealed. But Gettler was so passionate that he helped develop portable tests for these prohibition agents so they could test alcohol in the field to see if it was poisonous or not and take it off the streets. But people were still dying. Norris did his thing where he publicly spoke out, like it was in a newspaper. He spoke out about prohibition, and the only solution would be the repeal. But this methanol, this goes on throughout the 1920s and until prohibition is repealed, these deaths from methanol. And we'll see alcohol kind of come back in another form that's killing people later on in the doc. But methanol was one of them. So kind of like I said before, like Norris and Gettler were very different. Norris had the political, very public side. Gettler was still doing stuff on the back end. Even when he failed, he still was winning. And, you know, the mayor ended up cutting Norris's funding so badly that Norris himself was bankrolling the department. He was paying people out of his own personal
That's wild.
wealth. And because he believed in this so much, he's like, I cannot let this fail. The mayor is cutting my shit. Like, I got to pay people. I got to keep this up and running. Like, I don't want to see this fail. And he was seeing, like, each case he took, like, he was coming up against bigger and bigger opponents in the form of corporations. And in 1924, he encountered such an opponent. So, cut to Elizabeth, New Jersey. A factory became known as the Looney Gas Bin and had seen a rash of deaths among their workers. Their workers experienced memory problems, irritability, and like dementia-like symptoms. They were going like insane. So here's a couple of these workers. On October 24th, Ernest Olgert became delirious and ran around like he was being chased. That same night, Walter Dymock walked out of the second floor window of his bedroom and just laid on the street until someone found the poor guy. And then William McSweeney began acting so strangely, his sister called the cops, and it took 4 people to detain him.
That's insane.
So all of these guys were working at the same factory, this Looney Gas Bin. The public wanted answers, and a spokesperson for the company explained, this boils my blood, and this we'll see this again with radium. So a spokesperson for the company said the men probably went insane because they worked too hard. Fucking assholes. They're blaming the men. They're just working too hard. They're not taking care of themselves. It's their fault.
That's all it is.
So, what were these men working with in this factory? Just a little old thing to revolutionize the automotive industry, leaded gasoline. They were working in a leaded gasoline factory, and who was the employer? The cartoonishly evil Standard Oil.
I did not know this story about like leaded gasoline. This was fascinating to me because I always just like, oh yeah, unleaded, but like why? Like I never knew this
Why?
story.
So,
Never knew why. I never thought to. I didn't care to like know why.
if you watch another docuseries that I like called The Men Who Built America, you will learn about the founder of Standard Oil, cartoonishly evil John D. Rockefeller. And
Yes.
he did a lot. I'm not going to deny that he made incredible leaps and bounds, but also terrible things. So
Oh God, yeah.
Standard Oil is the company that this building was owned by. So leaded gas helped cars run more efficiently, and Standard Oil teamed up with General Motors to become the sole providers. They had a monopoly on this. And they knew people were freaked out by lead. They were like, we don't want to call it lead. People know lead is poisonous. So we're going to call it ethyl gas. And because there were basically no rules back then, they were able to effectively lie to people. And people, like, they knew how poisonous lead was. So we're going to market it completely different. And at this time, the automotive industry is booming. Like, cars are becoming a thing, Henry Ford, Model T, and there's tons of money to be made on gasoline. But because these factory workers were becoming ill and dying, Standard Oil was afraid it's going to affect our bottom line. Oh no, we're going to lose money. Not the fact that people are dying, but like,
No.
where's the money? So they scheduled a press conference to be like, everything's fine. Look, I'm washing my hands in the gasoline. It's perfectly safe. Literally. They did this whole like performance.
Gross.
But the authorities weren't buying it. And they were like, shut your factory down. We can't do this.
That goes to my whole thing about follow the money. The more you push something at me, the more I don't trust it. Because like tactics like that, like, see, look, it's all good. No bullshit.
And it turns out it's a bitter loss in the end. So the authorities in Jersey went to Norris and begged him to help. They're like, can you help us out with your fancy medical examiner's office and lab? And Norris was convinced they died of lead poisoning, but he needed proof. And they needed to prove 3 things: that lead was found in the men's bodies, they absorbed it at work, and that it had killed them. So it's a tall order. So Gettler did tests and found that the men's brains were just soaked in lead. It was in their brains.
Oh.
So now he needed to find out how much. But the levels were so high, the test was inconclusive. It was off the charts so bad that it rendered the test useless.
Yeah, it basically said
Horrifying.
if it's bright red, then it's lead, and the darker it is, the more saturated it is. And they were like, we can't even, it's so dark.
It's maroon.
We can't even, yeah.
Oh my God.
So Gettler, he developed a whole new test. And it was very painstakingly labor intensive. Like, he had to do stuff where like he took all their organs and like tested them to find out like how much lead, like the weight of it was in a certain portion. Like 1 ounce of lung has like how many grains of lead or whatever. And he found the men had chronic tetraethyl lead poisoning. Not only were they inhaling it, they were absorbing it into their skin. So just all around. And Norris didn't hold back when he published his findings. He was like, this shit is dangerous. It needs to be banned. And amazingly enough, people listened. New York banned it, shortly followed by New Jersey and then Philadelphia. A huge win for the dynamic duo. But evil corporations don't give up that easily. And the president at the time was Calvin Coolidge.
Small government.
Yeah, small government, no regulation kind of guy. Well, we know the types.
Yes,
so
we do.
all Standard Oil and General Motors had to do was call up their buddy and say, hey, Cal, can you help us out, bro? And Coolidge appointed a panel of experts. These experts were scientists who worked in the gasoline industry. So they paid for a
Mhm.
study for them to say, like, all you need is a mask and some gloves and you'll be totally fine, no big deal. And the public is fine too because they basically have like no exposure, which is false. So the federal government lifted the ban and tetraethyl leaded gas was back in the market. Standard Oil said it was a gift from God. With this was pure irony here.
Oh God, yeah.
The inventor of the tetraethyl lead, Thomas Midgley, was less enthusiastic because he had to take a leave of absence due to lead poisoning.
Like, just, not an obvious sign.
The corporation part, like the part of these corporations is what like gets me the most. How they were able to run so rampant and unchecked, and the way they blamed the workers, and all they had to do was like call in a favor and just have all of the work that Norris and Gettler did just completely thrown out the window. It would be so incredibly frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think about like kind of anchoring back to the call at the beginning about like how much money do you have to really be willing to go up against, right? Because now it's bigger and harder, and it is like you're saying, these are their like attempts to kind of set them back because they can't get them on the day-to-day stuff, but money talks, and it's interesting and fascinating, but also so devastating to see like how corrupted and ingrained money and control is and just everything, and how everything is set up, and how, I don't know, this whole, like I said, I found it fascinating about the leaded gasoline story because I just had never paid attention to it. So this one is really deep and raw in me over the last couple of days, just learning more about it. It's really infuriating.
Now when you see unleaded gas, you know why. It's unleaded.
Yes.
Now I don't know exactly like when it was banned again. They didn't really go into that. Now, this guy, Thomas Midgley, who had to take a leave of absence because he had lead poisoning, I was morbidly curious, and I was like, wouldn't it be like kind of funny if he died of lead poisoning? But he did not. He ended up getting polio in 1940 and was disabled. And in 1944, he was found strangled to death by a device he devised to allow him to get out of bed unassisted.
So something else he invented killed him instead.
And another thing he invented killed a lot of other people. So he's
Yeah.
just batting 1,000.
Yep. Yep.
Not a great legacy, unfortunately.
No. So this ended up like being a really bitter defeat for Norris, and he took a leave of absence to Europe for 6 months. He was bummed. It sucks.
Yeah.
And today, like back then, I'm sure it was difficult. Today it's even more difficult because like they'll bury you under like piles of paperwork and like lawyers, and they'll drag it out and just make your life miserable until people give up. Like I feel like that's the MO nowadays. Just make it incredibly difficult.
You can't get away from it either nowadays. Like back in the day, he could go to Europe for 6 months and like things would die down because nobody'd be talking about it. But now everything's so global that it just like wouldn't happen that way.
His Twitter feed be blown up.
Yeah.
He'd be on Fox News. The five would be talking shit. He wants to control. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
God,
I don't want to
stop.
Okay, so when Norris came back in the fall, he was ready. He was like, okay, I'm refreshed. I'm ready to go. I had some L's. I took some L's, but I'm ready to get back in it. And his first case back was that of Frank Travia. And he was found dumping a dismembered body into the off the pier.
I'd like to know how, because I watched it and tried to understand how did the jump happen to be like, like I get it, but why even go investigate? Like, why did they investigate? Like, did I miss that? Like, why? Like,
I think they technically have to.
Yeah, I mean, every body comes across Norris's table at one point.
I forget because the actual office is actually up and running at this point, so it does have to cross them.
Yeah,
I forgot that piece. Okay. Yep.
So the cops were just like, obviously he killed her. Nobody dismembered the body.
Obviously.
Can I take this moment to talk about how beautifully and wonderfully this documentary doesn't even say it, but very clearly and overtly shows how unconcerned people were back in the day with, number one, personal hygiene around dead people, and also crime scene, like messing up crime scenes. Because in this scene, Norris is like, you can see him look at the body, and then he just like right into that blood, like into the puddle of blood, like just
Yeah.
steps right into it. And I'm like,
Nope.
you know, the one homicide that I ran in EMS, they only allowed us to go in and be like, yeah, that guy's dead, and then immediately made us leave again. Like that we could
Wow.
not like hang out.
Did
So
you go over to like shoe booties and stuff on your feet?
no, not
Oh.
yet. But like we just went in, we put the cables on the guy, and we're like, yep, definitely dead. And then they're like, okay, get out. Like immediately
Damn.
get out. So
Oh yeah, no,
to
they
go
were
from
fucking
like
up
stepping
crime
in the
scene.
blood puddle to like that. It's just so
No.
funny.
I just feel like death was treated very differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Yep. It's the no gloves on the like the fake stomach stuff in the beginning too.
When he was like washing his hands and like there was no gloves, I'm like,
yeah,
what the?
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Ew. Okay, anyway,
So
sorry.
the cops are like, obviously Travia killed this woman because no one chops up a body unless they have some shit to hide.
I mean, I'm still a little suspect that he chopped a body up. Even.
He was a weird guy, okay? Like he was an odd fellow. We'll find
It makes
out.
sense when he explains it. I mean,
It
it doesn't make
does.
sense. It doesn't make sense, but it's like at least you can see
The thought process.
the thought process
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, I
So.
guess.
So Gettler, all he had to do was look at this blood that he stepped in to see that the woman died from carbon monoxide poisoning. So when someone dies from carbon monoxide, their skin turns this bright cherry pink color and their blood is stained like super bright red. So much so that like blood can be taken from a corpse like weeks later and you can still see this profound effect on blood.
So oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm just going to try to like, this one is a more triggering topic. I had a good friend of mine and her family all died of carbon monoxide poisoning in
God.
high school.
It's
so
still a thing. Like, yeah.
like her whole family died. So just as a, if we can, this one.
Yeah. So Norris had seen this a lot because back in that time, illuminating gas was used and it killed like people really often. So he was very familiar with it. The police the police thought, okay, well, it's in her body, but she just probably absorbed it after death. It didn't kill her. But Norris didn't think it was possible. And at the time, the cops were kind of being shitheads. They didn't want to listen to this guy. They weren't trained in forensics. They didn't understand. They had no respect for it. So they just could not believe, again, they could not believe this guy would dismember a body that he didn't like kill her or something. So Norris is like, fine, I'll prove it. I'm not taking this shit from
I
you
love
guys.
your note here. Fine.
So Norris and Gettler run some tests to see if a dead body could absorb carbon monoxide. He took 3 unclaimed bodies and sealed them in airtight boxes, pumped them full of this illuminating gas for a couple days, and all the tests for carbon monoxide came back negative. A dead body cannot absorb the gas. So at his trial, Travia told his side of the story. The woman was Anna Fredrickson. She was a friend, and they would come over, get drunk together. And one night, they polished off a bottle and passed out. And when he woke up, she was dead. Travia was afraid he killed her. In a drunken stupor, he panics, leading him to dismember the body and dispose of it off the pier. So Gettler testified that a body could not absorb carbon monoxide post-mortem. It had to be the thing that killed her. And it was discovered that a coffee pot on the stove had been tipped over, extinguished the flame, filled the apartment with the carbon monoxide. And then Travia, either he had a lower exposure to it, which I think like if you, depending on like where you are, like if you're laying on the floor or like if you're elevated, that can make a difference. Like if the gas, I don't know which one it is, but like maybe the gas sinks. So if you're lower, you have more exposure to it. Regardless, he woke up. Anna Fredrickson did not, and he was found not guilty of murder. He was found guilty of like doing bad things with a dead
Illegal
body.
handling of a body. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Because so how carbon monoxide, it's such a silent killer and it makes me terrified constantly. I will never live anywhere without a carbon monoxide detector now, but actually after my friend and her family passed, I think her brother survived. but they made it mandatory where I lived in the county and there that everyone had to have carbon monoxide detectors put in because it was not mandatory at that point. You only had to have fire. But after that, I remember a whole big thing came through and we passed. Everyone voted and passed to have them put in. And that was the first time I'd ever really heard about it. But it can just be such a careless thing. It can be so easily. It could happen so easily. So it's one of those things that I think will always give me some anxiety. Because you can't really smell it. You just get tired and you just go to sleep.
It's a big training module for EMS.
Interesting.
And one of the big things is like when you're kind of going down your differential diagnosis to try to figure out what's going on, is like, is everybody in the house sick? Basically, is a huge factor which is why it's very amazing to me that Travia was like able to wake up and just like get out, because I'm assuming this is the 20s, right? So it's going to be a really small space, no matter what. But yeah, and like I've seen calls come out where we've been like, oh, that sounds like it might be carbon monoxide, because like everybody in the family is feeling bad, like literally everybody. So yeah, it's definitely something that probably ever since this time, the 20s, it's been like a thing.
Yes, if you don't have a carbon monoxide detector, please go get one. I have a portable one that I bought because I don't have them at my apartment. I have a portable one that I just like have, and it's in my living room, and I just keep it there. It's like $20.
My apartment complex like puts them like they require it for us. Like they will come out and test them like twice a year or whatever. When they change out my air filter in my AC, they'll check it and make sure it's working.
Good.
It's required.
Good.
Because we have gas stoves, so with
that's why
the likelihood will go up. So this was a victory for Norris and Gettler because they convinced the cops to get on board with them. They were like, don't charge this guy with murder. Let us figure some stuff out. And now they were working with the cops as a team. They were no longer like these enemies. So that was like another step that they needed to get to in this whole process. Get the law enforcement, get the cops on board. So by Christmas 1926, Prohibition was still going on, and a bad batch of alcohol had hit the streets. People were really sick, and a lot of people were dying. So Norris was off, like his office was flooded with people. So everyone was still up to their normal ways of getting around Prohibition, but now they had taken to diverting industrial alcohol. So the government required that industrial alcohol that wasn't meant to be consumed, they were just going to make it poisonous. They're going to add a bunch of shit to make it poisonous for people.
That's awful.
Yeah, it was a way that they could control the industry and the manufacturing. And this alcohol, it was stuff used in cosmetics, medicine, and manufacturing. So they called it denaturing, and it allowed the government, again, to have a tighter control, regulate the market. So this denatured alcohol was now killing people. So with Prohibition, bootleggers had to take to redistilling this denatured alcohol, but it didn't get out all these impurities and all these poisons. In CD bars, it was called smoke, and it was super cheap, like a couple cents. So again, people who were really poor and that's all they could afford, they were the ones affected by this. So Norris and Gettler test this bad batch of alcohol and found a shit ton of poisons in it. So there was methanol, gasoline, cadmium, formaldehyde, and even more. So, and again, this is all government regulated. They were like, we're going to put this terrible shit in there so people won't drink it. And people still drank it because Prohibition does not work.
No. And at that point, if you're those who are down the path of alcoholism in general, like let's like put a divide there, like even those who socially would need it, you're still not stopping those people from being like, yeah, I can dabble in it still, I don't care. But then those who are truly going through an addictive cycle with it, this is just going to double down for them. Like there's no resolve there.
Yeah, wasn't this the section with that guy that they wanted to kill, and he just like,
he will not die.
Mike
I don't think a lot of
Malloy.
people would not.
I
Yeah,
didn't put his.
he-
I didn't put his.
But
story
it
in
was
there.
the same thing. He was like an alcoholic, so they just
Yeah.
kept giving him like terrible shit, and he kept drinking it, and he kept not dying.
Yeah.
They even gave
And
him
then
like
they
a
had to have a
sandwich with, like,
taxi run him over, and he still didn't die.
but he had like a sandwich with like broken glass in it. I mean, he ate everything and he wouldn't die.
Nope.
Yeah.
I was
They-
like, man is legend.
Very impressive. He's probably been drinking denatured alcohol for years at this point, so
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's
They,
preserved on the inside. You know,
he's just
So.
like pickled from.
he's
the inside.
pickled.
But yeah, they killed him for the life insurance. Like some
Mhm.
buddies at the bar.
Oh yeah, they took out.
out.
They all took out a life insurance policy on him.
So they were like, "We'll just give him this stuff, and like it'll look like he died of alcohol poisoning." But it wouldn't
Like,
work, and they had
can
to
we-
like.
It's like that
Can you
song,
just
"The Cat
say,
Came Back." Like,
Like, can we put out a thing that says no one's allowed to take a life insurance policy? I mean, like, that would be horrifying. I'd be terrified that people would do that.
but
That's
if
awful.
somebody does that with the expectation of murdering you, then at least they'll have a clue as
They're
to
gonna
who
get caught.
did it.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, sure, but okay.
But I don't think it had to do with people like being addicted to alcohol. It was just that nobody could trust and know exactly where batches came from.
Mhm.
So it was
Mm.
because it was bootlegged and it was this secret thing. Obviously, like richer people could afford nicer stuff, but
Sure.
in these bars, you're thinking like, I drink here all the time, but whoops, they got a bad batch, and it ended up killing people. So I don't think it's necessarily having to do with like people being alcoholics or like, and I'm sure there were, but it's just like people want to drink, and because it's outlawed, they have to go through these other means to get it, and it's unsafe and unregulated, and you don't know what you're going to get.
It's
Yeah.
literally like the opioid crisis right
Mhm.
now. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So during Prohibition, people truly had no idea what they were drinking. Norris campaigned to repeal Prohibition because it clearly was not working. But the government doubled down and was like, we're going to make denatured alcohol twice as poisonous. And trying to scare people off that way. Norris estimated that 10,000 people would die in New York of alcohol-related deaths. He viewed
That's
Prohibition
awful.
as a failed experiment that led to an extermination of lives.
Mm-hmm.
Truth.
Mm-hmm.
No lies were told. Okay.
No.
This is one of my favorite, but also one of the worst
Mm-hmm.
poisons that we get to. So we're cutting to 1927. The New Jersey authorities reach out to Gettler and Norris, and they want them to investigate a case of a woman who had been dead for 5 years. This would lead them to their first encounter with a horrific new poison.
Dun dun dun.
So we actually have to go back a little further because this all started in 1917. Amelia Maja was a young woman. She wanted to help her struggling family. So she and her two sisters got a job in a factory painting dials on watches with this glowing green paint. So again, 1917, World War I is still happening. And these watches were used by soldiers in the trenches because this glowing paint was just bright enough so they could see the face of the watch, but not bright enough so that it could give away their position and people could see them. The paint was made with radium, which gave it this magical glow. So radium was discovered by Marie Curie and her husband Pierre. It earned its name because it is radioactive. Radium, radioactive.
Like,
It's not a stretch for that name.
Yeah,
no.
right. So almost immediately, radium was used in the medical field to shrink tumors. And because it shrunk tumors, people were like, this is good for you. It's healthy. It's an elixir of life. Go to the radium bar and get an elixir.
Some of the like graphics that were shown, there was like the one with like the gold guy with like the golden like rays coming down from
Oh,
him.
yeah.
All the babies are like
Yes!
towards the radium thing. Like what?
The ads alone, like the ads or like the like products that they showed that
Mhm.
like had it, fascinating. Like
God. It does make me still think though, like that's why when I look at things advertising to me today, I'm like, nope, I'm not doing it. And
yeah,
the more money you're putting into that, absolutely fucking not. I'm not doing it. Like
it's
who's
become
paying
more
for this?
shady. It's become more
Oh,
insidious and more shady.
I mean, and yeah, I think it's always shady.
Yeah, but like
Yeah.
in this time, they knew there was no regulation. Now there is
That's true.
regulation, and there's ways to get around it, where you can make something seem healthy by using words that aren't
Yeah.
yeah. So like it's become more sneaky.
Yeah. And we'll get into that for the later, like the
Yeah.
pesticide stuff.
So they thought radium was like this blessing, and it was being used everywhere from cosmetics to candy. Have
It's like they were
some
like
glow in
painting
the
it in their
dark.
hair, like
Yeah.
putting on their makeup. Oh god.
And who could blame them? Because that's what they were told. So these girls were painting these watches. They thought nothing of it, if anything. Or one lady, I forget which one, she was like, they thought they were doing something good for them. It was healthy. And they just get a little bit more exposure to this wonderful, healthy thing. And they would paint their nails with it. They would put it in their hair. But
Eyeliner.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you looked cool. You were like radioactive, but
glow in the dark. Go to the club.
Oh man, that's an EDM festival right there.
By 1921, after 4 years of working at the factory, Amelia had to quit. She was extremely ill. She was losing weight. She was anemic and constantly bleeding from her mouth. Within a couple of months, her jaw had deteriorated so badly, her dentist was able to just lift it out of her face with his fingers. Just pull your jaw out of your face.
They didn't put the label on it in the doc, but it's her in the picture with the giant jaw.
Yeah.
That's her. Like, it's down to here.
Some of the pictures they showed were, it was truly horrifying how these girls were affected. So Amelia died in 1922. She was 25 years old. And she was only the first. She was the first. So other dial painters had died similar deaths. And by 1925, 5 were dead. And several others, including Amelia's 2 sisters, were now showing the same symptoms. So, of course, the radium company denied all responsibility. Many of these victims did not show signs until after they had left work. Like, I hadn't worked there in a year. So no one had ever heard of a poison that could take months or even years to kill someone in this way. And despite the company's naysaying, the local ME in New Jersey thought it had to be radium. It has to be connected. So he reached out to Norris and Gettler for help. Besties. He's like, besties, the BFF dynamic duo will help me out, man. So Gettler devised a test. He took sheets of x-ray paper, he covered them up so they would not be exposed to light. He placed the bones on top and he left them in the dark for a couple of days. And when he came back, this x-ray paper was like perfectly developed. You could see the bones exactly where they had been. The gamma rays from the radium had been bombarding the paper even 5 years after. And I don't know, their bones will be radioactive for hundreds of years because the half-life of radium is so it takes forever to break down. They're also, I can't say, I don't know the names of them and I can't say them anyway, but there are movies about this. I believe there's a movie on Netflix about it.
There's one just called Radium Girls, which is probably based on there's a book called Radium Girls too.
Yeah.
And I feel like, why did I watch this recently? Maybe I don't mean to say, Shanola Holmes or Enola Holmes. There's like a kid's, I think she investigated this, but like obviously in a kid-friendly way of showing it.
Yeah, something similar. Like, yeah.
Because I'm like, why did I just watch a movie that had this in it? And I think that was what it was.
Yeah.
But interesting.
So the Radium Corporation was forced to settle with some of the survivors. But of course, they were like, this is a scam. The statement they released, I was going to shoot through my fucking ceiling. Listen to this. I was about to like shoot through the roof. They said, we unfortunately gave work to a great many people who were physically unfit. Cripples and other incapacitated persons were engaged. What was then considered an act of kindness on our part has been turned against us. Fucking assholes.
Suck a dick. Like, rot in hell.
A whole bag of dicks.
Rot. So, more context. Most of these dial painters were young women. This was a job that, like, a lot of young women did, because it was like this detailed work that attracted like that kind of people. And women were just getting into the workforce at this point too. Like women didn't really work, so this was a new thing. And they hold on, I lost. So okay. In another asshole move, US Radium claimed the women were suffering from syphilis, a highly stigmatized STI. They did this to discredit the women's testimony and embarrass them into silence. Fucking assholes. So, in the movie, and I don't know how true this is, but like they were initially sent to a doctor that worked for US Radium. So like just go to the company doctor. And that doctor was like, you have syphilis, girl, you nasty. Like, stop being a hoe, I guess. And it had been known that radium was poisonous and was not good for you, and they covered it up. And the fact that they used they shamed women and said that it's because you have an STI when that's not what it was at all. What a shame. It's just like Standard Oil with the lead. Like, oh, they're just working too hard. That's their own fault. They're exhausted. It's not us. Couldn't be me. So the Radium girls would continue to come forward for over like decades, and 100 dial painters were slowly being poisoned, like over 100 of these girls. And what happened was how they got it in their system. They would paint these dials with a paintbrush, and they would lick the brush to get it to a fine point, so they absorbed it through their mouths. And radium is sneaky because it tricks the body into thinking that it's calcium. So you ingest it and your body's like, cool, calcium, go to the bones, girl. That's where you belong. And the radium gets to your bones and it's like, haha, tricked you, bitch. I'm not calcium. I'm radium. And now I'm going to make your spine crumble and your jaw fall out of your face. So there was nothing that could be done to cure these women. It was radiation. There was no cure. And it took years for them to die. A terrible slow death.
Honestly, I would have committed suicide. There's no way I would have kept living. There's no fucking way.
Yeah.
I would have
no hope.
Absolutely not.
So because of the radium poisoning, demand for radium went down, and people were finally seeing how terrible this shit was for you. But nothing could be done to help the girls. They were screwed. And Norris and Gettler, they were like had been banging this drum for years, because like the government had to step in and do something to protect the public from these corporations. And finally they were being listened to. Like, this kind of started the shift where it's like, oh my God, first it's Standard Oil with the loony gas building, and now US Radium Corporation. Like, we need someone to monitor these companies because they're just taking advantage of people. So cut to the 1930s. The Great Depression was in full swing. The Roaring Twenties were over, and they finally did away with prohibition. Finally. The 18th Amendment was overturned in 1933, and in the first years after Prohibition, Norris only saw 2 deaths from methanol.
That's fascinating.
It went from
wow,
however many he predicted, like 10,000, and I don't know what the time frame was, to just 2.
What, 13 years?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact statistic of like what he said. But so that's one thing off their plate. They're like, okay, cool, finally. Like, they listened. So now we're going to cut to 1935, which is we're in like the full throes of the Great Depression. And we're going to talk about the story of Frederick Gross. So Gross was a bookkeeper for a small company, and he was getting hit hard by the Depression. He kept his job, but he wasn't making enough money to feed his family. He had 5 kids and a wife.
Yeah.
There was no coal. He couldn't heat his house. He only owned, the poor guy had one good suit, and he still owed money on it. Like,
hold please.
Okay.
This statistic says up to 50,000 people may have died from the repurposed industrial alcohol nationwide during Prohibition.
Wow.
That is not a concrete statistic. But
and that's just the denatured. Does that include methanol? Like, when people are distilling,
they're probably including that, but yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
wild. Yeah. And then after that, he counted 2. And
Mhm.
prohibition, it went away slowly. It took time. They said, I don't know if I looked it up online, but like it took time for it to be like fully like phased out. But
Yeah.
in the year when it was totally gone, he 2 people. That was all. So back to Frederick Gross.
Back to Frederick.
It was poor.
Yes.
He was struggling. He had family, a wife and 5 kids. His wife Catherine told him their one son was sick one night, and by the next morning, the 9-year-old was dead. Shortly after that, his other son Leo also died, and then his wife Catherine died. And then another 2 weeks had passed. His 2 daughters died. So the whole family, except for one son, dropped dead. So word got back to the police, and the only one who wasn't sick was Frederick. So obviously, they're like, he's killing the whole family. We need to arrest this guy. The cops had one clue. Once again, the nosy neighbors are like coming in clutch here. One of the neighbors noticed that before his 18-month-old daughter had died, all her hair fell out. One of our ladies was like, she was as bald as an egg. The only child that was left alive was in the hospital. His hair was also falling out too. And they believed that it was thallium poisoning. The local medical examiner confirmed it. So Gross's employer sold thallium as a pesticide, which again, wild that this terrible poisonous shit is being used as a pesticide on crops that we grow, completely unregulated and unchecked.
They also sold
cocoa. What a combination.
I mean,
Pesticide and hot chocolate. Come and get it.
what are you gonna do? You know?
So one day, Frederick had bought home for his family a tin of cocoa, and they believed that that's how he was poisoning them. Gross maintained his innocence. He was like, this was not me. He had no real motive. There was none of these handy life insurance policies. And in what way did he benefit other than the terrible thought of like, okay, at least I don't have any more mouths to feed. Like, I guess that's kind of a relief, maybe. It was a really like dire time. And we'll find out how terrible it ended up getting. So Gettler ran tests on the cocoa, and he didn't find thallium. He found copper that had leached from the copper tin into the cocoa. But when they exhumed the bodies, they found all of them had thallium in it, except for the mom. She had died of encephalitis. The police were still stumped because if not for the cocoa, how did the thallium get into the kids? So gradually, the police discovered that Catherine was pregnant again. This poor woman. She's like, I have 5 kids. I'm pregnant again. She felt so terrible. She was like, my husband does not deserve this. I need to do something. And in
It's
such
awful.
despair over the situation, she poisoned the children as a twisted act of kindness to her husband.
That's disgusting.
It's terrible. Like, to be in that amount of despair and to know like she was probably didn't tell him she was pregnant. She's carrying that. She's like, oh my God, like I'm having another kid. We can't feed the ones that we have.
Yeah.
Also, the odds of that timing are just wild.
Yeah.
The fact that she died of encephalitis.
Yeah. What was
Like-
the plan? Was she planning on killing herself too? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or if she was just like,
I don't know.
we can't have all these mouths to feed, which is all of the kids were being poisoned. Just only one of them had survived. So Frederick Gross was freed and immediately went to the hospital to reunite with his sole surviving child. The story ended. It was really sad because his kid was like, why didn't you come visit me on Sunday, Dad? And he was like, son, I was busy.
Being arrested, but
I was
you know.
in prison. Or not
Crazy.
prison, but no. Oh my God.
So the depression is affecting people in that kind of way. You know, we had prohibition. People were dying from being poisoned. In the Great Depression, people were choosing to be poisoned or choosing to poison others in a sick, twisted mercy killing. So by 1935, Norris was on the job for 17 years, and he was just tired of this political bullshit. Day in and day out, he saw how other people were dying, and he tried his best to inspire change. meaningful change, but it was a constant uphill battle. And Norris was hopeful because there was new Mayor LaGuardia, and he thought he would be an ally. But that was not the case. LaGuardia was suspicious of Norris's wealth. He was like, this is a wealthy guy. Like, he has to be doing some corrupt things, which I think it's good to have a healthy amount of suspicion. But to be so public, Norris was just dragged so publicly. And in May of 1935, LaGuardia accused Norris of embezzling $200,000. The investigation went on for a month. Norris was humiliated. His reputation was tarnished. And of course, no embezzling had been found. And again, it was found that Norris had used a great deal of his own fortune towards funding the department. So Norris took another leave of absence, but when he came back, he was not refreshed and renewed and ready to go. And on September 11th of 1935, Norris passed away at the age of 68.
So
What a,
his
like, sad thing. Sorry, go ahead.
his Wikipedia said, and this is what a lot of people did back in the day when they were starting to feel ill, they would travel to like somewhere, or sometimes it was like Healing Springs or blah blah blah. He went to South Africa because it's like, oh, I'll feel better. Like maybe there was something in South Africa that he thought was like healing or something. But people did that. Like if you read all these like stories back in the day, they did that. They'd be like, oh, we'll travel across the country to this random place and we'll feel better after that. you know? And it also said that he ended up dying of heart failure, you know.
Yeah. The documentary said like his heart gave out, which is like, it's super sad to think of it that way. Of like, he's like, I just can't deal with this shit anymore. And I don't know if he was like actually ill with something, or he was like, I'm burnt out and I need to get away and like have some vacation time. Like, that's how I looked at it.
I think that people back in the day didn't really understand heart failure.
Yeah.
So he probably had been physically declining during this the whole time too. And then like him working as hard as he was, and also like having to defend himself on all these issues and everything, wouldn't be doing anything but exacerbating that. So yeah. But
so Norris was a local legend. He was dearly missed by all who worked with him and for him. But Geller had to carry on without his friend. And less than 2 weeks after Norris's funeral, Gettler would be met with a very familiar face. So we're having a full circle moment.
I love this. This was so good.
So, cut to the story of Ada Applegate. She died, and no one was suspicious until the police received an anonymous letter, once again, with old newspaper clippings featuring none other than Fanny Creighton. And then I said, who the fuck is this anonymous person?
Is that neighbor? She never got over it. Never.
Or Fanny is snitching on herself because she wants to confess.
Could be.
She did come clean about her bro. So
that's true.
Fanny was alive and well. She had moved in with the Applegates as a way to survive the Depression. And the police took custody of Ada Applegate's remains. They like charged into her funeral when they realized like, it's Fanny again. We got to go to the funeral. And like the service was going on when the police busted.
I would have loved to have been in that funeral. That would have been amazing.
So they took custody of her remains and sent them to Gettler. And everywhere Gettler looked, he found lethal amounts of arsenic. She's got a signature, guys. So the police immediately turned to Fanny, and she was all too happy to talk. She admitted to killing her brother with arsenic for the life insurance policy, but because she was already found not guilty, there was nothing they could do. Double jeopardy. They had to prove that she killed Ada Applegate. So Ada's husband, Everett, was fixated on Fanny's 15-year-old daughter, which is nasty.
Gross.
Fanny was cool with this because she's like, I'm tired of feeding this little kid. Like, take her off my hands. Times are hard. I don't want to deal with her anymore. She would.
And these two families have moved in together too.
Yeah.
Because neighbors during the Depression would
live
oftentimes
together.
Move in to one house to like save money, basically.
Downsize, yeah. So she would even send her daughter, she would track her daughter's period to make sure she didn't get pregnant. She would send her to Everett's room to be like, get it, girl. 15 years old. I don't know how old he was, but it had to be at least in his 30s.
It's nasty.
So Ada's husband, yeah, he was obsessed with Fanny. So they devised a plan. They kill Ada with arsenic so her husband could take her daughter off her hands. So now Gettler was testifying against Fanny. So before, and one of our ladies in the doc, one of our like narrators, who was like, I wonder what he thought. Because how many years ago, 10 plus years ago, he's defending her. And now he's met with her again, but he's on the other side. Like, what could have been going through his mind? So
I mean, he's just following the science, like.
Yeah. And now this is where he had become such a trusted expert where people were like, fuck, if he's on the other side, we're losing. We are totally losing because he had put in the years and the work, and his testimony was considered like the gospel truth. So Fanny and Everett were found guilty of murder, and 7 months later, they were executed in the electric chair. Equal rights, women can get executed too. Love to see it. So we're winding down. That was like our full circle moment. So since Gettler started his work in 1918, he had witnessed the pendulum swing in favor of science. Before Gettler, juries didn't believe in forensics, and now cases hinge exclusively on scientific tests. Forensic files, it's a whole fucking show. Like true crime in general, like is
like fingerprints aren't even enough anymore. Like you have to you need DNA, you know,
and like the forensics, the blood work, the particulates, hair, like all that kind of stuff. So Gettler continued to work as a toxicologist until he was ready to retire in 1958 at the age of 75. Normally, the city workers retired at 65, but they loved Gettler so much they were like, "Nah, bro, you can stay on for like 10 more years. Like you're cool." This was also, now we're in the 1950s, and this is a very cultural, prosperous time, even more than the 1920s. And in large part, due to Gettler, it became almost impossible to get away with poisoning someone and killing them because now they knew, they're like, no, they're going to find out. It's harder to get away with it. So Gettler and his colleagues revolutionized criminal investigation. Forensic science was a respected science and also had this cultural phenomenon ushering in stories and radio shows centered around sleuths and detectives. So there's the birth of the true crime era. Gettler had accomplished what he and Norris set out to do all those years ago, and that was his legacy. Like, he actually turned down a TV show. They wanted to like make a TV show about him, and he was like, no, I like doing my work. This is what I like. This is my legacy. I don't need a TV show. He was so secure in himself. Norris, unfortunately, did not get to see this full culmination. Again, he died super sad. But Gettler did, and by 1959, the Federal Drug Administration had been established to police chemicals found in food, medicine, and cosmetics. So there's like, finally, there's this government agency overseeing these corporations to bring some order, to make sure they're being safe and they're not doing any of this out-of-pocket shit, poisoning people or putting crazy stuff in things. So the documentary closes.
No, they just then turned to putting cheese and everything. The Food and Drug Administration was responsible for stuffed crust pizza.
Big dairy.
And
big dairy. So but I guess that's better than radium. So
they had so much stockpile of cheese. They were like, we need to do something with all the cheese. Truly.
Put it in the crust.
That's truly.
That's in the G word. Have you seen that one, Sarah?
No, I forget what.
I guess I can't talk about the G word, but anyway.
It wasn't some kind of docuseries.
It's like Adam Conover talks about it. Yeah.
They had just like stockpiles of cheese.
We've moved from poison to just cheese. So
which will kill you eventually if you eat it enough.
Sadly.
A better way of going out than dying from radium poisoning.
Yes. I think I would rather eat cheese.
Death by cheese. So Norris had learned, we're going to close out. This is how they close it out. Full circle. Norris learned this motto in Europe. And when they like moved the toxicology and medical examiner's lab to the new location, they still have this plaque on the wall. And it says, let conversation cease, let laughter flee. This is the place where death rejoices to help the living.
Hmm.
Because that's what they do. Like, I think it was said somewhere in the documentary that like the medical examiner is a doctor and the dead person is like their patient, and they have to help them and figure out what happened. So to this day, like, he's still this legendary kind of figure within that community.
That's awesome.
Super cool, super interesting.
Yeah, it was an incredible, like, the way that they did the documentary really helped tell his story by anchoring it to all these different poisons and things and all the toxicology. Like, I'm really glad that you mentioned this one as one for us to talk about, because I would never have done it on my own. It just wouldn't have been one that piqued my interest that far, but it's really insightful.
Yeah. The framing device, like I know you mentioned, Rebecca, like how they framed it was really cool. Like you get the intro, you get introduced to Gettler and Norris, and it's broken up by these poisons. So cyanide, methanol, radium, leaded gasoline. Like that's how it's broken up, and that's the framing device. And it goes through their careers as they discover and work with and deal with all of these poisons.
Yeah.
So do we have any comments? Does anyone leave any comments for us?
No. Oh, Craig just said hi.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
Tux,
Tux, what do you have to say? Tux has come to tell me it's time.
Adam did say that he's like, this is really interesting. He texts me.
Oh, nice.
Like, I know. I'm a good picker. Like,
if you all choose to watch the thing after this, you can find it in many places, including on Amazon Prime, where if you go for it there, you can get a 7-day free trial to PBS documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like $3 a month after that. So
yeah, it's not bad.
PBS was a good thing. All publicly funded education. Wonderful. Love
and
that.
not part of the AMPTP, so we can talk about it.
Hell yeah. Any final thoughts? Like what like stuck out to you the most, or like what story or like what facet of it like stuck with you the most?
I think it's pretty impressive to me that like just how much influence these two guys had. I didn't really know that history of it. So that was really fascinating. And just to have been in situations where all of this I've seen firsthand, like all of this progression of this work is just really, really interesting. If anybody's ever, if you're not squeamish, you can go actually watch an autopsy, and it's pretty fascinating. So, and that's all of that is because of what they, did. So
it was like, looking back, like we look at it now and it's like, this is just the standard, this is normal, but they truly had a vision. They were like, we need to reimagine this whole thing and see it completely differently, and that's what they did. They like had a mission, and they were like, we are out to do this, and they did it.
I'm gonna stand true with it more than ever. It makes me really firm that I do not trust what's being marketed to me, because if you have to put money behind it, or if you have to spin it to me, I don't.
Yeah.
There's malice there. I do not trust it. Like, it is not net good for me. Like, I don't at all. So it just breeds more distrust for me in the industry.
Yeah, and who knows, kind of like what I said before, like who knows what we'll know in 20 years. What documentaries are going to be coming out about, like, whatever, Monsanto, all these pesticides, things that are causing cancer in people now that like we don't really know about. Like, what will we know 20, 30, 40 years now of what's happening right now?
Yeah.
And corporations that are running rampant and unchecked in their own way now, this new way of rampant and unchecked, because they have people on the payroll, they call up their buddy who works for the government, they get stuff, like, it still happens. So you can't really trust anyone anymore.
Nope. Nope.
But yeah, that's the Poisoner's Handbook. Highly recommend. Wonderful documentary. Again, I still go back and rewatch it every now and then.
It's a
And
good
I think it
one.
was a book too. But I
It was. I actually got the book, and then I was like, I don't really want to read this before I just watch the thing.
Oh, you got the book too?
So I have the book. Yeah.
Oh,
Nice.
fascinating.
I might
I
have to
figure
follow you.
maybe reading it afterwards if there's more information
Oh,
might
yeah.
be interesting, but I'd rather do it that direction than the other direction. So
Yeah. The two main ladies that were like kind of speakers or narrators within the doc too. The one was like a forensic pathologist. They were super interesting to listen to. Like
Mhm.
again, that kind of helps the documentary become more digestible, like having good storytellers in there. It was narrated by Oliver Platt, which I would have never guessed that unless I saw his name in the credits. He's got a very nice voice. It's not like very boring. It won't put you to sleep, I don't think. So
No,
yeah,
it was
very
great.
intriguing and engaging. So
mhm.
All righty. That was awesome. All right. I'm getting attacked by a kitty cat.
cool.
I guess we don't know what we're going to talk about next time, but
We
rest
don't.
assured we will be talking about something
Something
interesting,
Yeah.
and we
about
will let you know very shortly before we decide to talk about that thing. So,
Mhm.
Surprise.
in
Surprise
true Three Fry
mystery.
Short fashion. So,
Yes.
without further ado, I can play our outro because there are
Yeah.
no lyrics. So,
Perfect.
bye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.